Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer. I make guides and discussion videos about RPGs, and I enjoy playing games that have interesting stories and settings in a more casual way. I've heard a lot about PiranhaBytes RPGs. I even tried out Gothic 1 and 2 some years ago, but I couldn't get into them as the combat was too difficult and janky. The jank is a big part of these games, as they are European AA titles, but in this situation, I really couldn't get past the gameplay experience to be able to go through the game's story. There's also another reason I didn't like Gothic and didn't try out the other PiranhaBytes games until now, which is that you can't customize your character, and you're just some basic, slightly snarky white dude, which isn't all that appealing to me. A good RPG for me either has the ability to customize your character, or a compelling enough protagonist that will make you not care that you can't change their name, gender, or appearance, like Harry in Disco Elysium or Andreas Mahler in Pentiment. Still, just because PiranhaBytes games don't have a compelling protagonist, that doesn't mean that they can't be good in other areas. Especially nowadays when big AAA companies seem to have lost the ability to make good RPGs and keep trying to reinvent the wheel instead of using tried and true game design, cough cough, Dragon Age. I think it's really important to look in the past as well as towards other smaller companies to see what they have to offer in the RPG scene. It's sad that PiranhaBytes closed down because they made games that were beloved by a certain niche of RPG fans, and I would have liked to see what they continue to make going forward, especially as I think they figured out some things with Elex and Elex 2 from the reviews and videos I saw online about those two most recent games. You may be asking, why did I play Risen now when I wasn't interested in it before due to my negative experiences with Gothic 1 and 2? Well, I was convinced by videos about the Risen games, in particular Risen 1 and 3, by Click4Gameplay and Mortismal Gaming. While their videos talk about both the positives and negatives, thus also showing me the ugly, janky side of the game, there was a seed of something magical that I could glimpse too. And that little something made me want to experience Risen for myself, even though I knew before starting the game up that I absolutely wouldn't finish it due to the combat difficulty, as well as the more boring aspects of the later chapters. I did have the main story of Risen spoiled from all the videos I watched about the game, so I knew going in that the last two chapters are mainly just dungeon crawls to collect items, and then the final boss battle is a weird puzzle platformer encounter that uses sword and shield gameplay, even though up until then you can fight however you like in various styles, including magic. So, obviously, I didn't subject myself to that as I have never been a fan of dungeon crawling, and especially not of boss fight with weird mechanics. Lots of preamble before I get into the meat of this one, just to say, Risen is not a perfect game. It isn't even the kind of game I can enjoy enough to finish. But I knew that from the start, and I just wanted to get to experience the first parts of the game, getting my bearings in a new area, interacting with the locals, joining a faction and gaining their trust, improving my skills. In truth, even without this being a special case, the first few hours of an RPG are always the most fun for me because I like the feeling of progression you get early on. Every little thing you do feels significant. Whether you talk to an NPC and find out details about areas, enemies, or just other people around there, find useful items in chests or in hidden areas, learn your first few abilities or skills, and defeat enemies that are quite difficult due to you having limited abilities and starting level gear, the beginning always feels fun. I think Risen does a fantastic job of this early game experience. I found myself stranded on an island with basically no gear, only managing to scavenge a hunting knife and a few other items off of the beach. It was a surprise to find out that I could open up muscles, and one of them had a pearl that was worth a lot of gold. The game feels very immersive in surprising ways. The items you can interact with and the environment aren't glowy, don't look out of place. You can loot various herbs and plants, and they blend seamlessly with the environment other than the fact that their name pops up if you're looking at them. Same thing with the mussels and other items I found strewn around the island. Even though these items were obviously placed there by someone, the way I discovered them felt far more organic due to the care that was taken by the level designers to make things feel like part of the world. You can't just willy-nilly purchase a full set of armor from a merchant or find one in good condition on a dead body. The only way for you to gain armor is by joining a faction and getting them to grant you a set of more durable clothes or armor. I really loved this aspect of gear progression because it felt so satisfying when I finally had even just worker clothes from the bandits. I genuinely felt that I worked hard to get those clothes, and they had a very significant impact on my defenses, since before that I was just dressed in some rags that I washed up on the shore in. There are other neat immersive details, such as the fact that you need a frying pan to cook over a fire or stove, and you need other various tools to use for certain actions and skills in the game, such as a shovel for digging, a pickaxe for prospecting, as well as needing the prospecting skill, various tools to extract valuable materials from animals such as pelts, teeth, wings, and the like. I was genuinely surprised to find that you often need both a tool and a skill to be able to engage with certain aspects of the game. Unlike Skyrim, which just allows you to mine ore if you pick up a pickaxe, in Risen, you have to actually get taught by someone about prospecting, which I think is a really nice touch. In fact, all the other skills you learn throughout the game aren't just things you magically figure out on your own whenever you level up. You get learning points each level up and have to use a certain amount of these points together with money at an NPC who can train you in that skill or to train you to be stronger or more dexterous. Sure, there are a few items here and there that give you a point in a skill for free, and I wish that they didn't exist, because in some cases, like with sneak and acrobatics, they only have 1 point, and thus the existence of the items negates the need to ever train these skills. But otherwise, I absolutely love the character progression, because it makes more sense than just giving the player some points to distribute among whatever abilities they want, with no real reason for them to just suddenly know how to execute a new type of attack or pick locks. Given enough time and effort, you could argue that the player character would eventually figure out a skill, attack, or spell on their own without external training, but that would take weeks or months, if not years. So it's not really all that viable to let the player character do something like that within the context of an RPG's main storyline that is likely supposed to occur within a matter of a few months at most. I would have liked to see trainers that offer you one training for free or at a discount if, for example, they owed you a favor, or if you became friends after being through a few quests or situations together. I think it would have added to the immersion. It feels a bit awkward to have to keep throwing hundreds of gold coins to the same NPC, especially if it's someone you've interacted with multiple times for various quests before. Speaking of quests, I found that the bandit quests were very well designed because they got you talking with all the major NPCs in the camp that were involved in multiple quests, learning their perspective upon various topics and opinions about other NPCs, as well as finding out that some NPCs could train you in certain skills and attributes. Having to solve these often overlapping issues between the bandits made the camp feel like a weird little dysfunctional family. It worked really well to characterize them individually and as a group. On the other hand, when I went through the first 2 chapters again to try out the Inquisition/Order side of things, I can't say I enjoyed the quests there as much. Going there too early means you don't really have skills, gear, or money. That can get you stuck on certain quests. I got stuck on the fighting training quest because one of my opponents was so tanky and did so much damage when he attacked my guy. After many reloads, I managed to beat him, but it was extremely tedious and it made me feel less interested in continuing the questline. And then just a bit later, I got stuck on the murder investigation quest because the NPC I was supposed to ask for help saw me steal something and refused to speak with me. Because I was low level, I didn't have a jest spell scroll to use on him to make him forgive my earlier transgression, so I just wasn't able to complete that quest at all. I did what else I could from the Order questline, such as learning some of the ingredients needed for spells and such, but for some reason, most of the quests there felt annoying and tedious, especially when compared to the bandit camp quests. Now I understand why so many of the NPCs you meet constantly tell you to make sure you don't get caught by the Inquisition, because they'll force you to join them and they suck. They really kind of do. I highly recommend joining the bandit camp on your first playthrough because their storyline is much better. If you do want to try out the Inquisition side, I recommend going into town first and leveling up there by doing various quests, and then joining the Order. By doing quests in town, you can increase your power, and I also think it may be possible for you to join the Order willingly, rather than have the monks attack you on sight, knock you out, and then force you to join. On the whole, however, I greatly enjoyed the bandit and town quests because there were often multiple ways to solve them. You're given quite a few different options in dialogue, which isn't necessarily something you expect from an old AA RPG, and can also employ different methods to acquire various pieces of information or quest items through conversations, combat, stealing, sneaking, and so on. Other than the quests themselves, I think the world building was solid. It was a very fascinating premise to be locked off on this island with the rest of the world possibly already ruined by the Titans, or at least with the only hope against them being on this island. It's well explained why the Bandit and Inquisition factions are present, and they have clear, understandable goals. It's also nice that you get to talk to NPCs who aren't part of either faction and are just going about their lives in town, and you can hear a lot of different people's opinions on the two factions. The types of magic with scrolls and runes add to the more mysterious and mystical aspect of the world, and magic in general, even if you just use it with scrolls, is very fun. The dialogue was pretty well written, though it was a little bit stilted at times. Even so, the characters shone through, and I could clearly understand who they were and what their deal was. I know PiranhaBytes was a German studio, so I can tell that a lot of thought and effort went into the English version of the game. The voice acting was surprisingly good quality, and I recognized a lot of voice actors who did voices in the Dragon Age series, such as Alex Wilton Regan, Christopher Godwin, Matthew Ashford, Peter Bramhill, and so on. As someone who's been playing Dragon Age for a long time, hearing these voice actors made me feel more attached to their characters as I immediately got a hit of nostalgia and hominess. The only voice acting performance that left me a bit puzzled was that of the main character, as it felt like the voice actor wasn't sure how to read the lines, so he read them in a dry way. The protagonist is meant to be a bit of a smartass, snarky kind of guy, but the acting didn't make me sympathize with the protagonist since it lacked emotion. Obviously, there's also the element of not being given the choice of who to play. Even if they would have let you be either him or the lady who also survives the shipwreck, that still feels more like you have a choice and makes you feel better about the character you picked. Obviously, I'm aware that having 2 different voices for a protagonist is expensive, as well as making different animations, models for items, and so on. But I still think that being able to customize the look of your character, or even choosing 1 out of 2 or more preset characters, would have added a lot of value and RPG-ness to the game. I mentioned the combat of PiranhaBytes games being janky and difficult, and that's still true in Risen. However, I found that it was a little bit easier to understand how it works, but that doesn't mean I was able to be very good at it, even on the easiest difficulty. Essentially, blocking is your best friend, since when you block an attack, you don't take any damage. And if you can time your block just right, you can stagger the enemy for a bit and be able to do a counterattack. I was not able to do this most of the time, frankly. However, even with my poor skills, and especially timing, I was still able to get through fights eventually through sheer will, because I was genuinely interested to see what would happen next in the story. This was true in regards to the bandit camp and town quests, but not so much the order ones for reasons I've mentioned already. I found the melee weapon skills a bit confusing, because you have axe fighting, staff combat, and sword fighting, but then you find weapons which are very much not axes or swords, but they are made to fit within that category. Hammers are for some reason axes, even if they do blunt damage instead of blade damage. It's confusing to put a blunt weapon in the axe category. Similarly, in the sword category, you find clubs and maces, which also do blunt damage, but should not be in this category. I would have preferred if they just had sword, axe, and staff weapons without hammers, clubs, or maces. The game tries to be more immersive and realistic in other aspects, such as requiring you to have specific tools for certain skills, but then dumps some extra weapons in these categories without any real reason to do so except to have more weapons in the game, which to me isn't a good enough reason. The stealth and pickpocket skills are useful, but a bit janky and underwhelming. Stealth doesn't always seem to work how you expect. Sometimes you go into stealth and NPCs or enemies that should see you don't have any reaction. Other times, you think you've successfully sneaked past someone and they're suddenly screaming bloody murder at you like 30 seconds later. I have no idea how or why I sneak successfully or not, and while I appreciate having even a rudimentary version of stealth to avoid certain combat situations or get inside a guarded or restricted area, it feels confusing. With pickpocketing, it's a similar situation. I like that this option exists because it allows the player to approach quests and item acquisition differently. You can pickpocket an item from an NPC, or beat them up and loot them while they're unconscious, buy it off of them, or possibly convince them to give you the item in another way. Having the option to pickpocket a quest item is great because it adds an extra way the player can progress through the quest. However, it's not very well implemented. You only have 1 chance to pickpocket a single item from an NPC. You have to do so in dialogue with them, and there is a timer element that requires you to quickly read through all the items they have available to pickpocket and choosing the one you want. This sucks because if, for example, you pickpocket something else from an NPC before you get a quest that tells you they have a quest item you need to obtain, you won't have the chance to steal the quest item anymore. It doesn't make much sense to me that you can only pickpocket someone once. If you do it successfully and the NPC has no idea you were the one who stole from them, why wouldn't you be able to do it again? I do like that pickpocketing is something done in dialogue through distracting the NPC in a mentalist magician kind of way, rather than you going into the stealth crouch behind them and picking their pocket. In general, however, I do like the skill system Risen has, even if it's obviously undercooked and could have been improved if they had had the time and resources to work on it more. It's great you have to learn new skills or improve your skills or attributes by training them with NPCs because it adds to the immersion. Even more than that, the NPC that teaches you actually gives you some advice, telling you some information about how to use the skill successfully. I don't know if the information is super accurate, but I love the fact that you don't just click a button and get the skill. You see the NPC teaching you, even if it's just 1 line of dialogue. I haven't mentioned the visuals of the game because I'm not really the kind of person who cares too much about them. Do I prefer that a game looks good? Sure, but it's not the most important aspect to me. Risen looks like an early 2000s game, even though it was released in 2009. A lot of NPCs look basically the same as each other, and that made it quite confusing at times when I was trying to find a specific character for a quest and kept talking to the wrong person. I think the lack of variety of clothing and armor also adds to the game looking more dated than it actually is. Other than having too many NPCs who look the same and not having enough clothing and armor variety, I don't have any complaints about the visuals. In fact, I'd even say that I was surprised sometimes at how beautiful and immersive the areas felt, despite not being high res. I attribute that to the amazing level design. Clearly, someone spent a lot of time and effort to make each level feel immersive and interesting, placing various items around the world in ways that make sense and reward the player's curiosity. The game also has a day-night system and different weather, and I don't know, there's something magical sometimes about the look of things, especially towards the evening and at night. Sometimes I just spent time looking around and enjoying the scenery. In particular, I love the design of Harbor Town. I kept looking out at the sea and sky and admiring the look of the town in general. I think taste in the visual aspect of a game is something very personal, however, so you'll have to decide for yourself whether what you see from my video is good enough visually or not. In conclusion, Risen is a European AA game from the late 2000s, and it shows. It has janky combat, somewhat unbalanced skills, occasionally stilted voice acting, especially when it comes to the protagonist, subpar character models, and the lack of choice in customizing your protagonist. However, despite all of its faults, it has many good and interesting elements, such as a good amount of choices and dialogue, as well as multiple ways to solve many quests, great level design, a more immersive progression system, and a solid story, even if the experience falls off in the second half of the game. The things it does well are memorable enough for me to remember the first half of the game fondly, and wish the game could have had more time and resources to improve on the really cool and ambitious ideas the developers had. Even with just playing about 20-something hours in total, I think the game was absolutely worth the price I paid when I got it on sale. I believe it was something under €4. In other words, this is what I'd consider to be a truly B-tier game. Good enough to play and enjoy, but not necessarily worth full price. Considering all of this, if you enjoy the same kinds of things I do, such as a good story, multiple ways to solve quests, and care about feeling more immersed in the world and story of an RPG, then Risen may be for you, at least the first half of the game. Since you can find the game on sale pretty often, I don't see why you can't give it a shot for a couple of hours to see if it clicks. This has been my 2024 review for Risen by PiranhaBytes. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you played Risen, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. If you're looking forward to more videos about RPGs, do remember to subscribe and leave a like and comment while you're at it too. They really help. A special thank you to my members, who help keep this channel running. I'd really appreciate it if you consider joining the channel as a member to support me and unlock perks like early access to videos. This has been B-Tier Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.